President Donald Trump says the United States has nearly achieved its core objectives in the war on Iran. In an address from the White House, Trump said his forces would continue to hit Iran extremely hard in the coming weeks. To discuss this and the latest developments in the war, we're now joined by Andreas Krieg, who's an associate professor at the School of Security Studies at King's College London. Thank you so much for your time, Andreas. So President Trump suggested that he plans to escalate, but also said that military operations are nearing completion. What is your assessment of where this is going from a military perspective? What options does he have in front of him in the next 2 to 3 weeks?
There's no real options apart from diplomacy and trying to get a deal with the Iranians in a situation where the bargaining situation for the Iranians is much better than for the Americans. The speech yesterday was a sign of desperation that this U.S. administration doesn't really have any leeway to escalate further. They're kind of stuck in a spiral of escalation that they don't control, but the Iranians control. He, at the same time in that speech, was saying that he's going to double down and he's going to hit harder. He's used very, very disturbing imagery of saying he's going to bomb Iran back to the Stone Age, suggesting war crimes against civilians and civilian targets, and at the same time kind of providing an opening door for an off-ramp, saying we've achieved all the targets and if we can call it quits whenever we want to. He didn't make any suggestions as to how the much bigger problem that the world economy is facing right now over the Straits of Hormuz is going to be solved. It shows how clueless this U.S. administration is, how little strategy they've had since the beginning, how little planning has actually gone into it. And also in terms of his advisors, there doesn't seem to be anyone who is actually standing up to him and saying, listen, we need to find an off-ramp and we need to build partnerships and build a consensual environment where we can work with our partners in the Gulf, partners in Europe, and even in Asia to kind of get an off-ramp. And it doesn't seem like him having any sort of idea of how to do it. What we hear from him is compulsion, it's coercion, and it's force.
And he also said that Iran is no longer a threat, but we've seen Iran significantly intensify its missile attacks on Israel, for example, in the last 24 hours. What does that suggest to you about the escalation, the Iranian escalation, and what do we know about their remaining capabilities?
The remaining capabilities are still quite significant. We are nowhere near the situation where the Iranians are unable to fire projectiles into the Gulf or even into Israel. Obviously, these are two different trajectories. Going into Israel is far more difficult. You need to have more sophisticated technologies, much further range missiles, but they still seem to have quite a lot of those. Those are the most sophisticated ones that have probably just been built after the June war in 2025. Of them, they were able to fire quite a lot at Israel at a time when the entire intelligence networks and the early warning and radar network that the US has built across the region has been very much decimated and degraded. So what we see now is the Iranians are actually able to hit targets much more precisely and actually getting through. And obviously when it's about hitting Gulf countries, they need far less sophisticated projectiles to do that. And when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, all they need to do there is fire a very cheap drone every now and then to disrupt trade and undermine the confidence of markets into the strait.
On the Strait of Hormuz, Andreas, I mean, this is an important lever for Iran, no doubt. And the UK is supposed to be hosting this virtual summit to discuss options to reopen the strait. Trump said that as soon as the war ends, things will go back to normal, that the strait will open up naturally. Those were his words. How realistic is that? And what do you expect from the Europeans as they discuss these options to reopen the strait?
I think we're now at a very pivotal point in US-European relations and US-Gulf relations. I think there's been a realization in Europe over the last couple of weeks that the United States is no longer a reliable partner, and that Europe has to fight for itself. I mean, we've seen that already over Ukraine. When it comes to the Straits of Hormuz, the international community has to come to some solution, a multinational, multilateral one, and it's not going to be a military one. There is no military way to force this gate open, and that's been quite clear. So any sort of solution has to be a diplomatic one where countries engage bilaterally or multilaterally with the Iranians directly, with or without the Americans, to kind of get a free passage. Restoring the freedom of navigation around the Strait of Hormuz is absolutely pivotal. It's a global commons. It's one of the main arteries for the global economy. And so all of them have to come together beyond just speaking to one another. They need to engage the Iranians independently and do whatever it takes in order to avoid the catastrophe that's down around the corner, which is stagflation, major inflation, at a time when already European economies are struggling. And so that's where we are right now. But we cannot wait for Donald Trump to make up his mind. He doesn't seem to have a plan. And so Gulf countries and the Europeans need to work together closely outside of that framework of the Americans to kind of retain some sort of autonomy and strategic sovereignty in this space.
Thank you so much. Very interesting to hear your thoughts about this. Andreas Krieg, professor at King's College London. Thank you for your insights.